Alsace, France. January 26, 1945. Snow lies heavy on the open fields near the edge of the Bois de Redouire, turning shell craters into shallow white bowls. The air is thick with cordite and wood smoke. Ahead, beyond the thin American line, the dark shape of Holzwihr village crouches against the horizon. Somewhere out there, elements of the German 19th Army are gathering to crush the bridgehead the Allies have carved into the Colmar pocket. On a slight rise in front of the woods sits an American M10 tank destroyer from the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion, its crew gone, its hull already burning from a direct hit. Flames lick from the open turret, ammunition inside cracking off in sharp, random bursts. Most of the men from Company B, 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division have fallen back into the trees, ordered to form a new defensive line. What's left of the company is under strength, exhausted, and outnumbered by an enemy force of tanks and some 250 German infantry moving steadily across the snow. One man stays forward. A slim, 5'5" lieutenant from Texas climbs onto the burning steel, swings the .50 caliber machine gun toward the advancing line, and refuses to give up the field. Before we dive deeper into this frozen battlefield and Audie Murphy's insane stand on a burning tank destroyer, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and hit the bell icon. Watch till the end to see how two small Texas farm boys stopped 6 German tanks and 250 infantry almost alone, and became one of World War II's most decorated soldiers. Winter 1945. The trap called the Colmar Pocket. The moment on the burning tank destroyer only makes sense if you first see the map. It is January 1945 on the Western Front. To the north, the smoke of the Battle of the Bulge is still drifting away. Hitler's last major offensive in the Ardennes has failed, but it has delayed the Allied timetable and drained precious reserves. Further south, along the Upper Rhine in eastern France, another problem remains: a block of German-held territory around the ancient city of Colmar that the Allies call the Colmar Pocket. This pocket has existed since November 1944, when the U.S. 6th Army Group, under Lieutenant General Jacob L. Devers, liberated northern and southern Alsace but left central Alsace in German hands. The German 19th Army, commanded by General Siegfried Rasp, dug in along the Rhine and the lowlands between the Vosges Mountains and the river, clinging to a strip roughly 40 by 30 kilometers in size. From Berlin's point of view, this foothold west of the Rhine was politically and militarily vital, a last shred of French territory still under German control and a potential springboard for further mischief if the Allies overextended. For the Allies, the pocket was a dangerous bulge in their line. It prevented them from securing the west bank of the Rhine, threatened their southern flank, and complicated any plan for a broad advance into Germany. The task of eliminating it fell to Devers's 6th Army Group, built around the French 1st Army under General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny and the U.S. 7th Army. Numbers tell part of the story. According to post-war summaries, the Allies committed roughly 420,000 troops to the Colmar pocket operations between January 20th and February 9th, 1945. The German side fielded the 19th Army, including formations like the 708th Volksgrenadier Division, elements of the 2nd Mountain Division, and assorted fortress and assault gun units, backed by around 70 armored fighting vehicles. Casualty estimates vary, but Allied losses in the pocket ran to about 13,000 French and 8,000 American casualties, while German casualties were between 22,000 and 38,500 men plus most of their armor. Causally, the pocket existed because of earlier decisions. In late 1944, Eisenhower's priority was the drive through the Ardennes and up to the Ruhr, so resources were diverted north. That left Devers with too few fresh divisions to finish off central Alsace before winter weather closed in. German commanders seized the opportunity, reinforcing Colmar and turning its surrounding villages, forests, and canals into defensive strongpoints. The result was a frozen stalemate, a pocket the Allies could not ignore, but had not yet paid the price to clear. By January 1945, that calculation changed. The failure of the Ardennes offensive freed up Allied reserves. Politically, freeing all of Alsace mattered deeply to both French public opinion and General de Lattre. Strategically, as a War Department analysis later noted, leaving German troops west of the Rhine risked a surprise counterattack into the Allied rear as they prepared their own crossings. The only acceptable answer was to crush the pocket and push the German 19th Army back across the river. The terrain made that task ugly. Central Alsace is a patchwork of flooded fields, small villages, orchards, and tree lines. In January 1945, the ground was frozen, the air bitterly cold, and visibility often poor. The reed plain north of Colmar, where the action at Holtzwihr would unfold, was crisscrossed by drainage ditches, streams, and canals. Patches of woodland like the Bois de Riedwehr offered cover, but they also provided ideal positions for German machine guns, mortars, and anti-tank weapons to command the open ground. This environment favored defenders. German units of the 19th Army and LXIV Corps set up a defense in depth, citing orders from higher command to hold Colmar as long as possible. They used the villages, Holtzwihr, Riedwehr, Grussenheim, and others, as fortified points, with interlocking fields of fire. Volksgrenadier battalions, although often short on experienced NCOs, could still lay deadly ambushes with panzerfausts and machine guns. Assault guns and tank destroyers lurked behind hedgerows and buildings, waiting to fire at any Allied armor that broke into the open. For the French and Americans, the logic was grim but clear. They would have to attack straight into this maze. On January 20th, 1945, the latter's French First Army and elements of the U.S. 7th Army began a coordinated offensive to reduce the pocket. French units advanced from the south and west. U.S. formations, including the 3rd Infantry Division, attacked from the north and northwest. Each day meant more men committed, more casualties logged, and a little more ground clawed back from the Germans. The Colmar pocket was not just another operation. It was the last significant German foothold west of the Rhine. On February 9, 1945, after weeks of hard fighting, the final German units were pushed across the river, and the Allies at last held an unbroken front along the Rhine's west bank. War History Online and other modern studies emphasize that this cleared the way for later offensives, including Operation Undertone and the Rhine crossings, without a hostile enclave threatening their southern flank. But those big arrows on the map were drawn from many small, brutal engagements, actions in places most people had never heard of, frozen vineyards, canal bridges, and woods like the Bois de Riedwehr on the outskirts of a village called Holtzwihr. Into that bitter landscape came an American division that had already seen more than its share of war, and within it, a young officer who, on paper, should never have been a combat leader at all. The 3rd Infantry Division and a too small Texas farm boy. By the time the Colmar Pocket Offensive began in January 1945, the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division was no stranger to hard assignments. This division, the Rock of the Marne, had already fought its way from North Africa in November 1942, through Sicily in July 1943, across the beaches at Salerno and Anzio in Italy in 1943-44, and then ashore again in southern France in August 1944, before pushing into eastern France and the Vosges. Official histories count 531 consecutive days of combat for the division in the European theater, an extraordinary stretch even by World War II standards. That experience came at a price. Each campaign, Tunisia, Sicily, Italy, southern France, the Vosges, had taken its share of casualties. Regiments like the 15th Infantry were on their 2nd and 3rd generation of riflemen, rebuilding companies after every major battle. Yet, precisely because of that, higher command trusted the 3rd Division. When the time came to hammer the northern shoulder of the Colmar pocket, the dog-faced soldiers were once again in the lead. Within this battle-hardened division, one junior officer stood out for a very different reason. Audie Leon Murphy was born on June 20, 1925 in a sharecropper's cabin near Kingston, Hunt County, Texas, the son of Emmett Berry and Josie Bell Murphy. He was one of 12 children in a family so poor that newspapers were stuffed into the walls to keep out the cold. His father drifted in and out of their lives before leaving for good. His mother died in 1941, when Audie was still a teenager. Murphy left school after the 5th grade to pick cotton for $1 a day and hunted small game to put food on the table, responsibilities that hardened him physically and emotionally long before he wore a uniform. Those years on the Texas farms taught him to shoot accurately, move quietly, and endure long days with little rest, skills that would later map almost directly onto the demands of a World War II rifle company. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Murphy was 16. He wanted to enlist immediately. The Marines said no. The Navy said no. The Army's airborne units said no. At 5 feet 5 inches tall and about 110 pounds, he was, in their judgment, simply too small and underweight for combat arms. He refused to accept that answer. With the help of his older sister Corinne, who quietly adjusted his birth date on the paperwork to make him appear 18, he tried again. This time, in June 1942, the U.S. Army accepted him. The same system that had rejected him for his size now began to reshape him into an infantryman. After basic training, Murphy was assigned to Company B, 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, the unit he would stay with through almost the entire war. He landed with them in Sicily in July 1943, fought at Salerno and the Anzio beachhead in Italy, and then went ashore again in southern France on August 15, 1944, as part of Operation Dragoon. In these campaigns, Murphy's record grew at a pace that astonished his superiors. He earned the Distinguished Service Cross for leading a counterattack near Montelimar in August 1944, 2 Silver Stars for gallantry, 2 Bronze Stars, and multiple Purple Hearts for wounds received in action. By the end of 1944, officers who had once wondered if he was too frail for combat now saw him as one of the regiment's most aggressive and reliable leaders. Each decoration was tied to very concrete situations: a platoon pinned down by machine gun fire, a German position holding up the advance, a handful of men cut off and about to be overrun. In each case, Murphy's response was the same: move forward, close the distance, and do whatever it took to change the outcome. That pattern of behavior, grounded in his early drive to prove himself, became more dangerous and more decisive as his experience deepened. By late 1944, he had been promoted to 2nd Lieutenant, commanding elements of Company B. The 3rd Division, after fighting through the Vosges and helping to liberate Strasbourg, shifted south into Alsace as part of the drive on the Colmar pocket. When the January 1945 offensive began, Murphy's company found itself on the northern flank, near the villages of Riedwehr and Holzwehr, guarding the approach to the Bois de Riedwehr. The company he led was not the neat, full-strength unit described in training manuals. A World War II U.S. infantry rifle company was authorized roughly 190 men, including 6 officers and about 187 enlisted men. Months of continuous combat had whittled Company B down far below that figure. Many of its foxholes were manned by replacements who had joined the division only weeks before. Others remained empty, their previous occupants lying in cemeteries from Sicily to the Vosges. Causally, everything in Murphy's life up to that point fed into the situation he faced at Holzwehr. Poverty and responsibility had made him stubborn and self-reliant. Repeated rejection by recruiters had left him with something to prove. 2 years of frontline fighting with the 3rd Division had honed his instincts and stripped away any illusions about what war required. By January 1945, he was no longer the too-small farm boy from Texas. He was a combat veteran with a long list of decorations, commanding an understrength rifle company on the exposed edge of a critical operation. On January 26, 1945, the company would be ordered to hold a thin line along the tree edge of the Bois de Riedwehr, supported by a handful of anti-tank guns and an attached M10 tank destroyer from the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion. Opposite them, in the snow-covered fields outside Holzwehr, German armor and infantry were already forming up for a counterattack designed to smash the American bridgehead. The stage was set: an experienced but depleted division, a small, battle-hardened lieutenant, and a frozen strip of ground that neither side could afford to lose. On the morning roster, nothing about Audie Murphy looked like a future legend. He was 20 years old, stood about 5 foot 5 inches tall, and had weighed just 112 pounds at his enlistment physical on June 30, 1942. The Marines, the Navy, and even the Army's paratroopers had already turned him away as too small for their standards. Only after his sister quietly altered his birth date, and after he gained a few pounds, did the Army accept him into the infantry. That early humiliation left a mark. Murphy came from cotton fields in Hunt County, Texas, where leaving school after the 5th grade and working for $1 a day had taught him that nobody was going to rescue his family but him. When the war offered a way out, and a way to prove himself, he took it with a stubbornness that officers would later recognize in every combat report bearing his name. By the time he reached the Colmar pocket, the too-small farm boy had become, by most counts, the most decorated U.S. combat soldier of World War II, with a rack that already included the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, 2 Bronze Stars, and multiple Purple Hearts. Each decoration tied to very specific acts: leading attacks near Montelimar in August 1944, knocking out machine gun nests in Italy, dragging wounded men from kill zones in southern France. That record shaped his mindset at Holzwehr. The same drive that had pushed him to prove every recruiter wrong now translated into an almost reflexive refusal to abandon a position until there was absolutely no other choice. When German armor and some 250 infantry came at his thin company line on January 26, 1945, he was not only fighting for ground on the map. He was defending the men who had come to trust that their undersized lieutenant would be the last one to leave. In that sense, the human story is the hinge of the whole episode. Early rejection created a fierce need to stand his ground, and that need collided directly with the crisis on the snow outside Holtzwihr. On paper, a U.S. World War II infantry rifle company was a compact machine of firepower and manpower. The 1942 Table of Organization lists 6 officers and 192 enlisted men for a rifle company. Roughly 198 soldiers divided into a headquarters, 3 rifle platoons, and 1 weapons platoon. In reality, by January 1945, Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment was well below that authorized strength. Months of fighting from Sicily through Italy, southern France, and the Vosges had cut its numbers again and again. Many foxholes outside the Bois de Riedwehr were filled by replacements who barely knew their squad leaders' names. The ground they were told to hold made things worse. Their position lay along the northern edge of the Bois de Riedwehr, facing east across open, snow-covered fields toward Holtzwihr. The winter of 1944-45 in Alsace was described by French commander Jean de Lattre as Siberian, with temperatures dropping to -20°C and more than 3 feet of snow on the plain. The frozen soil made it difficult to dig proper foxholes. The flat terrain offered little cover except the tree line. Drainage ditches and canals cut across the approaches like invisible tripwires for vehicles and infantry alike. For anti-tank defense, Company B had very little. The 3 RD division's after-action accounts describe only a handful of 57mm anti-tank guns and 1 attached M10 tank destroyer from the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion covering the sector. If those few weapons failed, riflemen with bazookas and grenades would stand between German armor and the woods. Causally, that combination, an understrength rifle company, thin anti-tank assets, and exposed terrain, meant the line outside the Bois de Riedwehr was fragile by design. A concentrated German attack with multiple tanks and a few hundred infantry could punch through in minutes, threaten the entire bridgehead north of Colmar, and unravel days of hard fighting. That is the mathematical reality Murphy faced when he looked out over the snow and saw the enemy forming up. The men advancing toward Company B on January 26, 1945 were not acting at random. They were part of a larger effort by the German 19th Army to smash the American-French bridgeheads that threatened to cut the Colmar pocket in half. According to the U.S. Army's official history Riviera to the Rhine and later syntheses, the northern sector opposite the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division was held primarily by the 708th Volksgrenadier Division, supported by the 280th Assault Gun Battalion and other heavy weapons. In the days leading up to Murphy's stand, German forces had already counterattacked other elements of the division. On January 23, heavy tank destroyers and infantry from the 708th Volksgrenadier Division and 280th Assault Gun Battalion had struck the 30th Infantry Regiment near the Maison Rouge farm, catching the Americans on open ground and forcing them back with serious losses when frozen soil and lack of cover turned a fighting withdrawal into a near rout. Those blows convinced German commanders that aggressive, armor-backed thrusts could still disrupt the Allied advance. At Holtzwihr, they tried to repeat the formula. Contemporary accounts and later analyses describe a force of 6 German tanks or assault guns and an estimated 250 infantrymen stepping off against the thin line of Company B, 15th Infantry. Their objective was straightforward: drive the Americans out of the Bois de Riedwehr, roll up the flank of the 3 RD Division's penetration, and stabilize the northern shoulder of the pocket long enough for more organized withdrawals behind the Rhine. The causal chain here is clear. Higher-level German orders to hold the Colmar pocket as long as possible translated into local counterattacks whenever an opportunity appeared. The earlier partial success against the 30th Infantry showed that concentrated firepower and surprise could still yield results against even veteran American units. That experience encouraged the 708th Volksgrenadier commanders to commit armor and infantry against the exposed position of Company B. On paper, their odds looked good: 6 armored vehicles, several hundred infantry, and a wide, flat field against 1 understrength rifle company and a single M10. It was the kind of situation in which doctrine, statistics, and recent experience all agreed on the outcome. It was into that calculation, into that advancing line of tanks and gray-coated infantry, that Audie Murphy would soon step alone, climbing onto a burning vehicle that the Germans thought they had already neutralized. The German counterattack struck B Company's position like a battering ram, immediately destroying its primary anti-tank asset, an attached M10 tank destroyer from the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion. The vehicle was knocked out and instantly set ablaze by enemy fire, creating a catastrophic breach in the American line. For First Lieutenant Audie Murphy, the company commander, the M10's demise presented a stark choice: retreat or fight with nothing. He chose a third path. Recognizing the imminent danger to his men, he quickly ordered the remnants of B Company to withdraw into the safety of the nearby woods. But instead of joining them, Murphy ran forward toward the burning vehicle. The destroyed tank destroyer still carried a pintle-mounted .50 caliber Browning machine gun that remained operational. In a defining moment of lethal improvisation, Murphy climbed onto the burning, smoking hulk. The burning M10, which had moments before symbolized the failure of the American defense, was causally linked to the creation of an improvised fixed firing point. Exposed and elevated, Murphy used the heavy machine gun to dominate the entire German approach, transforming the wreck into a strongpoint that poured high-volume, continuous fire onto the advancing enemy infantry. Murphy's audacious stand was not merely a feat of direct firepower. It was a masterful blend of close-quarters fighting and expertly directed U.S. artillery, demonstrating the lethal flexibility of American fire doctrine. Even as he managed the sustained fire of the .50 caliber machine gun, Murphy simultaneously maintained his function as a forward observer. He utilized the M10's attached field phone, calmly directing the artillery of the 3rd Division onto the encroaching German forces. As the German pressure mounted and the enemy closed within range, Murphy made the extremely rare and calculated request to adjust the shell fire onto his own coordinates. Calling fire "danger close" on one's position was an act of tactical desperation, effectively eliminating the margin of error between friendly and enemy forces. However, it proved to be a decisive move. Thanks to the proven accuracy of U.S. artillery firepower and Murphy's calm, exposed corrections delivered from the field phone, the shelling broke the coherence of the German attack. The causal chain was brutally effective. The German attack broke apart, the tanks lost their essential infantry screen, and the supporting armor was forced to pull back under the concentrated, continuous deluge of American shells. The raw, visible display of courage emanating from the burning tank destroyer had a profound psychological impact on both sides of the conflict. From the relative safety of the woods, the surviving men of B Company were forced to watch, helpless, as their commander fought alone for nearly an hour, silhouetted against the smoke and flames. This extreme personal risk, visible to every man under his command, served as a powerful anchor for company morale, reinforcing their will at a moment when the line seemed ready to break. On the other side, the attacking German forces were thrown into confusion. Unable to accurately locate the source of the punishing, coordinated fire through the smoke, they massively overestimated the American strength, believing they were facing a far larger, determined force. Murphy's Medal of Honor citation estimated that his singular action killed dozens of Germans. Most importantly, this high-stakes, visible personal sacrifice bought precious time, giving higher command the necessary window to organize and rush support forward to plug what had been a critical potential breakthrough. When B Company eventually moved to reoccupy the ground behind him, their fighting spirit was fully restored, galvanized by the near-mythic sight of their commander's solitary victory. All of those threads, training, technology, artillery doctrine, and one officer's will, came together on a single frozen field when the German tanks finally rolled into view. By midday on January 26, 1945, the snow outside Holzwehr had been trampled into a dirty, frozen crust. The line held by Company B, 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division ran along the northern edge of the Bois de Riedwehr, facing east toward the village and the flat fields that led up to it. The men in those shallow foxholes knew what had happened here only days before. On January 23rd, the division's 30th Infantry Regiment had tried to push through the same woods toward Holzwehr and Riedwehr. Caught on frozen ground with little cover, under fire from at least 10 German tanks and tank destroyers and more than 100 infantry, they had been cut to pieces and forced to withdraw, leaving the Bois de Riedwehr contested. Now it was B Company's turn to hold. Their position was thin. Instead of the 190 men a rifle company was supposed to have on paper, they had only a fraction of that, worn down by months of combat from Sicily to the Vosges. Many of the names on the morning report were replacements. Many of the veterans had bandages under their overcoats. The ground in front of them offered nothing but snow, shallow drainage ditches, and the distant silhouette of Holzwehr. Shortly after noon, observers reported movement in the east. At first it was small shapes on the horizon, then more, then the unmistakable outline of armor. German units of the 19th Army, including elements of the 708th Volksgrenadier Division and attached assault guns, were forming up for another counterstroke. The force that emerged out of the haze matched almost exactly what American intelligence feared. 6 German tanks or assault guns with an estimated 250 infantry in support, advancing across the snow toward the edge of the woods. From the tree line, the sight was both familiar and worse than expected. The tanks came first, dark hulls grinding forward in line abreast, pausing only to fire. Behind and between them, gray-clad infantry moved in waves, rifles slung, machine guns carried on shoulders, panzerfausts visible against greatcoats. The snow muffled their footsteps, but not the clank of tracks or the crack of their opening salvos. German artillery and mortars began to fall around the American positions, softening the line before the armor closed. Shells burst in the woods, shredding branches, throwing snow and splinters over foxholes already too shallow to stop much shrapnel. Machine gun bullets ripped through the margins of the forest, slapping into trunks and the frozen earth. In that chaos stood 2nd Lieutenant Audie L. Murphy, commanding Company B. He had seen this pattern before, in Italy, in southern France, in the Vosges. He knew how fast an understrength company could dissolve under armor-backed assault. The men in the open could not trade shots with tanks. Even bazooka teams needed time and angles they didn't have. According to his Medal of Honor citation, Murphy commanded Company B, which was attacked by 6 tanks and waves of infantry, and he had only moments to decide whether his company would be crushed in place or live to fight from better ground. He chose to give it a chance. Murphy ordered his platoons to fall back deeper into the woods, to prepared positions, hastily scraped into the snow and frozen soil behind the original line. The plan was simple. The bulk of the company would withdraw before the German infantry reached bayonet range, using the trees as cover and forming a secondary line that might at least slow the assault. If they stayed in their foxholes at the forest edge, the tanks would simply overrun them. But any withdrawal needed time. Someone had to stay forward long enough to delay the Germans and coordinate supporting fire. Murphy remained at his forward command post near the edge of the woods, a field telephone line still open to the 3rd Division artillery behind him. As his men peeled back into the trees, he began calling for fire, giving map coordinates and corrections while watching the advancing line through the smoke and snow. Behind and a little to his right sat the one major anti-tank asset in his sector, an M10 tank destroyer from the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion. The 601st had fought alongside the 3rd Division all the way from Salerno, its open-topped M10s using their 3-inch guns to engage German armor and strongpoints. On this field near Holzwehr, that single vehicle's job was to help hold back whatever tanks tried to punch through the thin infantry screen. German gunners knew that too. As the enemy assault closed to effective range, one of the German tanks or assault guns found the M10. A shell slammed into the American vehicle. The hit disabled it, and flames began to lick from the open turret. Ammunition inside started to cook off, sending violent bangs skyward as rounds exploded in the confined metal box. The crew did the only sensible thing. They bailed out. Murphy watched as the tank destroyer's crew scrambled away from their burning machine and disappeared into the woods, joining the rest of Company B in the fallback positions. In the space of seconds, the company had lost its one purpose-built anti-tank weapon. The vehicle that was supposed to anchor the defense had become a beacon, a flaming silhouette on the snow, marking the point where the line had been. On the field phone, Murphy continued to talk artillery batteries onto the advancing German infantry. Shells began to land among the gray-coated ranks, throwing up plumes of snow and bodies. According to the citation preserved by the Smithsonian and other official sources, his corrections killed large numbers of the advancing enemy infantry even as the tanks kept coming. But artillery alone would not stop armor already within a few hundred yards. The German tanks were now abreast of his position, close enough that he could see the flashes from their guns and the churn of their tracks. With the infantry behind him and the tanks in front, the geometry of the fight had changed. If the German vehicles pushed past the burning M10 and reached the woods, they could rake Company B's fallback line from the flank and rear. Murphy's options narrowed. He could follow his men into the trees and hope the artillery and bazookas were enough. He could try to run laterally along the edge of the woods, searching for another weapon. Or he could do something that no training manual recommended. He looked at the burning M10. It was, as the citation later put it, in danger of blowing up at any moment, its hull already engulfed, its turret exposed to the full force of the fire. But on top of that turret was still mounted a .50 caliber Browning machine gun, heavy, reliable, and perfectly positioned to sweep the open field between the German infantry and the woods. In that instant, the loss of a formal anti-tank asset presented a new, even more dangerous possibility. The wreck could become a fixed firing point, a rough steel fortress sitting exactly where the enemy needed to pass. Murphy made his choice. He cradled the field phone, still connected to the artillery net. Then, with German tanks level with his position and infantry less than 100 yards away, he ran out of the relative shelter of the ditch and climbed up onto the hull of the burning M10. Behind him, in the shadows of the woods, the men of Company B watched their commander step alone into the open, onto a vehicle that could explode at any second, and turn toward the oncoming line. All of the threads you've seen so far, the understrength company, the thin anti-tank screen, the German plan, Murphy's history and temperament, and the flexible American artillery net, had now converged on one point of flaming steel in a frozen field. One man, one machine gun, and an army. For a moment, everything narrows to the top of that burning tank destroyer. Audie Murphy hauls himself onto the hull of the M10 from the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion, feeling the heat through his boots, smoke clawing at his lungs. Inside, ammunition continues to cook off, sending sharp internal explosions through the steel. The vehicle, as his Medal of Honor citation dryly notes, is in danger of blowing up at any moment. On the turret ring, the .50 caliber Browning machine gun is still intact. Murphy swings in behind it, thumbs finding the butterfly trigger. Ahead of him, less than 100 yards away, German infantry are fanning out across the snow, using the advancing tanks and assault guns as moving cover. Somewhere behind their line, an officer believes he's facing a shattered American company, already pushed back into the woods. Murphy opens fire. The .50 cal roars, the recoil driving into his shoulders, the muzzle chewing a line through the white field. German infantrymen, suddenly exposed, drop or dive for what little cover they can find. The official citation later records that he killed dozens of Germans with his fire from the burning tank destroyer, a phrase that condenses into a few words what multiple witnesses described as a continuous storm of tracers tearing through squads and machine gun nests. At the same time, Murphy keeps the field telephone pressed to his ear. He is not just a lone gunner. He is also the forward observer for 3rd Infantry Division artillery supporting the sector. Through the smoke and snow, he calls in corrections, adjusting battery fire onto the German infantry massing behind the tanks. The citation notes that he directed artillery fire on the enemy, bringing shells down so close to his own position that he later admitted he was effectively calling fire on himself to break the assault. Here, doctrine and desperation intersect. U.S. artillery procedures in 1945 allowed for flexible, rapid-fire missions when an observer could see the target and communicate clearly. But danger-close missions, firing within 100 yards of friendly troops, were rare and risky. Murphy's calm voice on the line, giving precise adjustments from the most exposed point on the field, turned that flexibility into a weapon as lethal as the machine gun under his hands. The effect on the German attack is immediate and cumulative. Infantry who had expected to follow behind armor now find themselves under converging fire, heavy machine gun bursts from the burning M10, and artillery airbursts exploding among them. Without adequate infantry screens, the German tanks become vulnerable, not necessarily to being destroyed outright, but to being tactically blinded. Tanks are not designed to clear woods alone. They need foot soldiers to flush out bazooka teams and spot threats. When those foot soldiers are pinned or cut down, the armor's ability to press the attack shrinks. Several German tanks continue to fire, shells slamming into the tree line and kicking up geysers of snow around the wreck. One round strikes so close that fragments wound Murphy in the leg, knocking him back and sending blood into the already smoky air. According to the citation and later interviews, he refuses to leave. He binds his wound and keeps firing, standing exposed on the hull to sweep the approaches with the .50 cal. Behind him, in the Bois de Riedwehr, the men of Company B watch a scene that defies everything they have been taught about survival. Their commander, a 20-year-old lieutenant not much bigger than many of his own riflemen, is silhouetted against flames and smoke, raking the German line and calmly talking to artillery batteries miles behind the front. Psychologically, it lands in two directions at once. For the Americans, the sight is electrifying and terrifying. Some later told historians that they expected to see him blown into the air at any moment. Others confessed that the only reason they held their fallback line was because they could not bear the idea of leaving him out there alone. His visible, extreme risk acts as a psychological anchor. If he is still fighting, the company has not yet broken. For the Germans, The effect is confusion. From their perspective, they are taking fire from a position they thought they had neutralized. Flames and smoke obscure the exact source. The volume and accuracy of the .50 cal and artillery suggest more than one gun and more than one observer. Some accounts from 3rd Division veterans argue that the Germans believed they were facing a larger force than was actually present, contributing to their eventual decision to pull back. Time stretches. The Medal of Honor citation estimates that Murphy remained on the tank destroyer and in forward positions for approximately 1 hour, holding off the attack. Over that period, the snow in front of the Bois de Riedwehr turns from white to a churned mixture of earth, smoke, and bodies. Gradually, the momentum shifts. Artillery shells land closer and closer to the German formations. Groups of infantry, shredded by airbursts and stitched by .50 caliber fire, begin to break apart, falling back toward Holzwehr or taking cover in the shallow ditches. Without a coherent infantry screen, the German tanks and assault guns lose their nerve. One by one, they begin to reverse course, backing away from the burning wreck and the stubborn line of fire coming from it. To push forward alone would be to drive straight into an American woodline full of unseen bazookas and anti-tank guns, something German crews had learned to fear earlier in the campaign. Finally, with the infantry attack broken and the armor withdrawing, Murphy allows himself to come down from the M10. He limps back toward the woods, leg bleeding, telephone line still in his hand. Instead of accepting evacuation, he organizes what remains of Company B, men shaken, cold, and stunned by what they've just witnessed, and leads them in a counterattack to reoccupy their original positions along the forest edge. From a strictly tactical perspective, the result is clear. A force of 6 German tanks/assault guns and roughly 250 infantry, attacking across open ground, has been stopped by one understrength rifle company, and, at its most critical moment, by one man standing on a burning vehicle. Company B still exists as a fighting unit. The northern shoulder of the Colmar pocket remains in Allied hands. The bridgehead that might have been rolled up in a single afternoon instead holds firm and will be expanded in the days ahead. The causal chain that began with German orders to counterattack and an exposed American line has ended in an outcome few would have predicted from the numbers alone. A destroyed M10 intended to be written off has, in Murphy's hands, become a temporary fortress. The artillery net designed for coordinated divisional fire has, through one forward observer's stubbornness, been focused like a lens onto a single field. And the too small Texas farm boy many recruiters had rejected has, in about an hour of unbroken combat, changed the fate of his company and helped seal the northern wall of the Colmar pocket. When the firing finally dies down and the smoke begins to thin, the field in front of the Bois de Riedwehr is strewn with German dead and wreckage. Behind that shattered assault line, the 19th Army has lost yet another chance to stabilize the front west of the Rhine. For the staff officers drawing arrows on maps, this is one engagement among many in a winter campaign. For the men who watched it happen, it is something else entirely. The day a burning tank destroyer became a fortress, and a lieutenant too small for the Marines held off a German attack almost alone. Next, we'll see what that stand meant beyond the snow outside Holzwehr, how it shaped the outcome of the Colmar pocket, and how it turned Audie Murphy into a symbol far larger than the field where he fought. When the last German tank turned away from the burning M10 and the crack of the .50 caliber machine gun finally fell silent, the field in front of the Bois de Riedwehr looked very different from the way it had an hour earlier. Where a few hundred gray-coated infantry and 6 armored vehicles had advanced confidently toward the American line, there were now sprawled bodies, churned snow, and smoking wreckage. The attack that German commanders had hoped would smash the northern shoulder of the Colmar pocket had stalled within a few hundred yards of its starting point. For Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, the most immediate consequence was simple: they still existed. Under normal battlefield math, an understrength rifle company facing 6 tanks and waves of infantry in the open should have been overrun or forced into a chaotic retreat. Instead, because Murphy held his ground on the burning tank destroyer long enough for artillery to tear into the attack, the company was able to fall back in some order, reform in the woods, and then reoccupy its original positions once the German armor pulled away. That mattered far beyond one unit's pride. B Company's position on the edge of the Bois de Riedwehr was part of a fragile bridgehead carved out by the 3rd Infantry Division on the northern side of the Colmar pocket. If that line had collapsed, German forces of the 19th Army, including elements of the 708th Volksgrenadier Division and attached assault gun units, might have been able to drive a wedge into the Allied advance, forcing the 3rd Division to pull back across the Colmar Canal and delaying the entire operation. Instead, the line held. On the same day as Murphy's stand, January 26, 1945, the 15th Infantry Regiment took nearby Reed Weir, while the 30th Infantry Regiment captured Holtzwehr the following day, January 27. These gains tightened the noose around the German defenders in northern Alsace. With the Bois de Riedwehr and the villages behind it in Allied hands, the 3rd Division could push east toward the Colmar Canal and link up with French forces driving from the south. Within 2 weeks, the broader picture came into focus. The Colmar Pocket Campaign, which had begun in earnest on January 20, 1945, ended on February 9, 1945, when the last German units of the 19th Army were pushed back across the Rhine. Allied casualty estimates for the operation stand at roughly 13,000 French and 8,000 American casualties, while German losses are estimated between 22,000 and 38,500 men and about 70 armored fighting vehicles. The causal link is not that one lieutenant single-handedly destroyed an army. Rather, Murphy's stand prevented a local German success at exactly the point where it might have had operational consequences. By denying the enemy a breakthrough at Holtzwehr, he helped keep the 3 RD Division's bridgehead intact, which in turn allowed the division to surge forward in the days after his action, reaching the Rhine-Rhone Canal by February 1 and closing the pocket from the north while French units squeezed from the south. Strategically, the elimination of the Colmar pocket did several things at once. It removed the last significant German foothold west of the Rhine in France, shortened the Allied front by about 850 square miles, and freed formations for subsequent offensives such as Operation Undertone and the final crossings of the Rhine in March 1945. It also had symbolic weight. Alsace, fought over repeatedly since 1870, was fully back in French hands. For the men in Company B, though, the aftermath was not written in arrows and numbers. It was written in the roll call. In an action where an understrength rifle company might reasonably have expected to be wiped out, many of them were still alive to stand in formation because one of their own had chosen to fight past the point where any sane calculation said to stop. That reality would soon reach headquarters, filter into reports, and climb the chain of command, turning what they had witnessed on the edge of the Bois de Riedwehr into a formal recommendation unlike any other. Next, we'll see how that recommendation moved from a frozen field in Alsace all the way to the highest decoration the United States can bestow, and what happened to the too small lieutenant once the shooting stopped. In the days immediately after the stand at Holtzwehr, there was no talk of legends, only of survival. Audie Murphy was evacuated from the line with a leg wound and the accumulated damage of years in combat. The men of Company B, 15th Infantry, stayed in the fight as the 3rd Infantry Division pushed on, helping close the Colmar pocket by February 9, 1945, when the last German units of the 19th Army were forced back across the Rhine. On the maps at 7th Army and 6th Army Group headquarters, the northern shoulder of the pocket was now marked by a solid Allied front, not a dashed line of uncertainty. But what had happened on January 26, 1945, at the edge of the Bois de Riedwehr refused to stay just another entry in a regimental log. Platoon leaders, company survivors, artillerymen, and officers from the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion all submitted statements. Their stories matched: 6 German tanks and about 250 infantry attacking, Company B ordered to withdraw, Murphy remaining at a forward observation post, climbing onto a burning M10 tank destroyer, firing the .50 caliber machine gun for roughly an hour, directing artillery onto the assault, and finally leading his men back to their original positions. Those accounts moved upward. At regimental and divisional level, staff officers matched testimony against casualty figures and battle reports. The pattern held. At Holtzwehr, one understrength rifle company had held against odds that should have broken it, and at the center of that improbable outcome was the same officer whose name was already attached to multiple citations from earlier campaigns. The result was a formal recommendation for the Medal of Honor. The citation, approved under War Department General Orders No. 65, dated August 9, 1945, and preserved today by institutions like the Smithsonian and the National Museum of American History, begins with the stark summary. 2nd Lieutenant Murphy commanded Company B, which was attacked by 6 tanks and waves of infantry. It goes on to describe how he ordered his men to withdraw, remained at his post, climbed onto a burning tank destroyer, in danger of blowing up at any moment, and used its machine gun and artillery fire to break the assault, killing or wounding about 50 of the enemy and causing the rest to fall back. On June 2, 1945, near Salzburg, Austria, Lieutenant General Alexander Patch, commander of the U.S. 7th Army, presented Audie Murphy with the Medal of Honor on behalf of President Harry S. Truman. Murphy was not yet 21 years old. With that award, he became, by most contemporary and modern counts, the most decorated U.S. combat soldier of World War II, having received every American decoration for valor then available, plus several from France and Belgium. His final tally is usually given as 33 awards and decorations, including Medal of Honor for Holtzwehr, January 26, 1945. Distinguished Service Cross for action near Montelimar, August 15, 1944. 2 Silver Stars, 2 Bronze Stars with V, and 3 Purple Hearts. The Legion of Merit, plus the French Legion d'Honneur, Croix de Guerre with Palm, and the Belgian Croix de Guerre. The decorations captured the scale of his wartime service. They did not erase its cost. After the war, Murphy returned to the United States as a national hero and an unexpectedly famous face. He appeared on the cover of Life magazine in 1945, was courted by Hollywood, and eventually starred as himself in the 1955 film To Hell and Back, based on his 1949 autobiography of the same name. The movie was a major box office success and for years remained Universal Pictures' highest-grossing film. But fame did not quiet what we would now call post-traumatic stress disorder. Friends, biographers, and Murphy himself later spoke about his insomnia, nightmares, and volatility, symptoms he openly linked to his wartime experiences. He slept with a pistol under his pillow, avoided crowds, and once admitted that he had jumped onto the floor at the sound of fireworks. Long before PTSD became a widely recognized diagnosis, he used his platform to argue for better treatment and understanding of battle fatigue among veterans. In that sense, Holtzwehr followed him home. The hour he spent on the M10 and the years he spent in combat before and after it did not stay neatly inside the frame of a citation or a movie. They shaped his adult life, the roles he chose, the relationships he struggled to maintain, and the causes he quietly supported. Murphy died on May 28, 1971, at age 45, in a plane crash on Brush Mountain near Catawba, Virginia. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery, where his grave, despite regulations limiting elaborate markers, remains one of the most visited in the cemetery, worn smooth in places by the footsteps of those who still come to read his name. In the decades since, the U.S. Army has institutionalized his memory in ways that reach far beyond World War II buffs. The Sergeant Audie Murphy Club, founded in the 1980s, recognizes non-commissioned officers who demonstrate exceptional leadership and care for their soldiers, explicitly tying their example to Murphy's blend of courage and responsibility. Hospitals, memorials, and training centers bear his name. Yet, for all the monuments and medals, the core of the story still traces back to that frozen field near Holtzwehr, a place where a burning tank destroyer and a young lieutenant's refusal to back down intersected with the fate of a company, a campaign, and a country's idea of what one soldier could do. If you walk the ground near Holtzwehr today, it is hard to see an army there. The fields outside the Bois de Riedwehr are quiet again. The snow that covered them on January 26, 1945 is long gone. The tank tracks have faded. The drainage ditches that once tripped advancing infantry now just mark the edges of farmland. Somewhere out there, beneath the soil, lie traces of an afternoon when 6 German tanks and roughly 250 infantrymen tried to crush a thin American line, and met a single lieutenant standing on a burning M10. On paper, the Western Front in 1945 was a story of vast numbers. Hundreds of thousands of Allied troops pressing toward the Rhine. Entire German armies, like the 19th Army in the Colmar Pocket, being pushed back step by step. Casualties counted in tens of thousands over a few winter weeks. In that framework, 1 understrength rifle company, 1 wrecked tank destroyer, and 1 20-year-old officer from Texas should not matter very much. Yet they do. Murphy's stand did not win the war in Europe. The Colmar Pocket would still have been reduced by French and American forces, the Rhine would still have been crossed, Berlin would still have fallen. But on that particular day, on that particular field, the decision of one man to climb onto a blazing vehicle and call artillery on his own position shifted the line between overrun and holding. It kept Company B, 15th Infantry, in the fight. It helped the 3rd Infantry Division maintain its bridgehead. It closed off one of the last real chances for the German 19th Army to throw the Allies back from northern Alsace. There is a paradox in that. Modern war is built on systems, logistics nets, fire plans, tables of organization that say a rifle company should have about 190 men, an armored attack should be met by designated anti-tank units, artillery should be controlled from safe, measured distances. At Holtzwehr, every one of those systems was bent or broken. The rifle company was far under strength. The anti-tank weapon was a burning wreck. The artillery observer was standing on top of the target. For about an hour, the outcome depended less on design than on a single human being's refusal to let go. That is why Audie Murphy's name endures, not just as a list of 33 decorations or as the star of a war film, but as a reminder of the strange, uncomfortable truth his story embodies. Even in an industrial mechanized war, the hinge can still be one person, at one place, at one moment, choosing not to step back. The field near Holtzwehr no longer echoes with gunfire. But in the quiet, if you picture a column of gray figures advancing across the snow and a lone shape standing against a curtain of flame, you can still feel what it meant when a too small farm boy turned a burning tank destroyer into a fortress and held.